Republicans who were running for the nomination for president in 2016 to run against Hillary Clinton. I was completely stunned by that debate because I think partially it was because of marriage equality and a couple other things, but probably 8 out of 10 of those candidates were vociferously anti-gay, proudly anti-gay. And when I had left just 2 years earlier, I thought maybe 2 of those people would have said what they said in the debate, Huckabee and maybe one more. But 8 out of the 10 were talking about bringing back Don't Ask, Don't Tell and repealing marriage equality and all of that. And I thought, wow, okay, things are going backwards all of a sudden. I need to pay more attention to this. And then I looked at what was going on at the state level. And when I saw what was happening at the state level, there were, as it says in the movie, over 200 anti-LGBT laws being considered by states in the US during that time. And I just thought, okay, marriage equality must have been some sort of last straw. And I know too many conservative Christian families who've gone through too much pain by alienating their LGBTQ child. So I need to tell these stories again. And what we hadn't included in For the Bible Tells Me So was anything about families of faith with transgender kids. And as you see in the film, the religious right had really taken on, they'd kind of given up arguing the biblical stuff around homosexuality because it's not valid. Virtually every Bible scholar will tell you that Sodom and Gomorrah, for example, isn't about homosexuality at all. It's about inhospitality. And it's just very clear that those 7 verses don't hold water. But they had really taken on the transgender community. So I wanted to find a couple families with transgender kids, and I wanted to find a very, very conservative evangelical family who could talk directly to those people who are most against the LGBT community because of what they believe their faith means. So that's why I decided to make it. It was much harder from Germany. I spent a lot of time in the US. I cut the film in Brooklyn. So I was flying back and forth every 10 days or so, which was tough. But I really wanted that editor because she had actually cut For the Bible Tells Me So. And her name is Nancy Kennedy, and she's as responsible for this film as I am. I mean, I spent 4 years making it, but in the year that she spent with me cutting it, her fingerprints are all over it. And she's absolutely, I think, the best editor in the business. So that's why I made it from this far away. I didn't feel like, I'm living in Germany, but I'm still an American. And it was super alarming to me what was happening. So I felt like, I'm a filmmaker, so I needed to do something about it. Berlin, and I don't know if you get that that analogy or not, but it's been quite stunning to be here through that. But separate from that, even before the 2016 election, honestly, Germany is a much more we country. It's about us, not me, much more than the US. Healthcare is universal through insurance, and your insurance isn't linked to your job. It's everybody has to have insurance. The poorest people don't pay anything for their insurance, and the richest pay the most. Because of my husband's income, we're considered very much at the upper end, even though for America we really aren't. But here, we make a living together, and so we pay the most, and it's still less than we were paying in the US. So everyone has healthcare here, so people are much healthier. Watching the pandemic, Germany had an incredibly low infection rate, an even lower death rate, probably a quarter of France and the UK, because its healthcare system is so incredible. There are also no guns here. that had become a really huge issue when I lived in the U.S. I lived in New York, and I knew two people who had been in proximity to serious shootings. And then I made this film, which obviously includes somebody else who was in a shooting. But Germany had a mass shooting in a school in 2003 and just said, this will not ever happen again. It went way farther than I even think is possible or positive for America. But here, they have made illegal all guns except for hunting rifles. And hunting rifles have to be kept in community centers under lock and key. You can't keep your gun in your home because it could be stolen or a child could find it. So when people go hunting, they check out their guns, and when they return, they check them back in. That makes so much sense to me. You know, I think Berlin is the biggest city in Germany, and a gun was fired like 2 years ago, once. And the bullet didn't hit anyone, and it was huge news. But then I'll, fly to the US and I'll be in Los Angeles. I remember being in Los Angeles working on this film. I was in my rental car driving to driving from the airport to my hotel. And I heard on the news, LA had the lowest gun death rate this weekend in 30 years. Only 12 people were killed in the last 2 days. I was like, oh my God, 12 people in 2 days in one city. And in Germany, if someone was killed by a gun, it would stop traffic and everything would stop, it would just be this huge thing. So I love America. I miss America. There's a lot I miss about it. And frankly, the vaccination speed in America has been much faster than in Germany, partially because America bought all the vaccine. But I wish I were there right now so I could get vaccinated. But other than that, I'm good. Darn it. Just my luck. So I hope I answered your question. It's a huge thing to ask people to obviously share their most intimate family stories in a film, particularly For the Bible Tells Me So was easier because I'd never made a film before. And I think a lot of the families who said yes thought it would just sort of disappear, but then it premiered at Sundance and that was over. But this film, it was harder actually because For the Bible had been so successful. Really, really amazing, but there was already a lot in this movie, and we had to cut one of the families, and that was the family that ended up not in the movie. But there was that family, and I may make a short about them. Okay, so that's Vico. So during and the irony is that the waves of vociferous violence that come at him are kind of juxtaposed to the fact that this guy is like the Dalai Lama. He is the most gentle, quiet, lovely, kind of divine being. And around him is this unbelievable belief-filled storm. So I'm not directing it, I'm just overseeing it, but I'm hugely blessed for that. I'm also executive producing a film in the US about a similar issue. So the word homosexual didn't appear in a Bible ever until 1946. And if you know about the Bible, it's been around for 2,000 years and was supposedly written then. But there's a certain translation team that decided to put the word homosexual in, and look what it's done since. So a Los Angeles-based director, a first-time director, a great woman, is making a film called 1946 about that and who were these people that made the decision. Because again, it's these movies that start to make people that put so much trust in the specific words in the Bible, not the Bible itself, but the specific translations, it will give them pause to think, oh, right, these weren't actually the actual words that were written back then by the people I believe in. These are humans who are changing the meaning. So that film, I am directing and producing a doc series about having nothing to do with homosexuality, about the fact that when Hitler came to power in Germany in 1933, one of the first things he did was put a Nazi in Los Angeles. He was the German consul to Los Angeles. His name is Georg Gissling, and his single job was to be sure that the American movie studios said nothing bad in any of their movies about Germany or Hitler, and nothing good about Jews. So he got to LA. He was able to use the fact that all the studios were making huge amounts of money in Germany. Germany was the second largest international market for American film. So he was able to say, gosh, great news. The new chancellor, Hitler, loves American films. You're going to do really well unless you say anything bad about him or Germany or anything good about Jews. So no more Jewish characters in any of your films. So there are no Jewish characters in any studio films from 1933 to 1940. He was able to censor more than 70 films. This is during the golden age of Hollywood. He was able to quietly change 70 films, and he stopped about 20 entire film projects from being made. And no one knows this story. I find it completely fascinating. And all 5 of these moguls with whom he was working, I mean, they were collaborating with him, were all obviously former Eastern Jews who had immigrated. So this movie is about why in business, when money is involved, ethics go out the window, and nothing is more extreme than this example. And as a filmmaker, I don't need to explain who the Nazis were, and I don't need to explain who Hollywood was in the golden age of Hollywood. So it's kind of I'm really excited about this film. I'm also producing, or we're not producing yet, we're developing a series called, I'm developing with a producing partner, a series called Lost to History, about amazing people who have done great things in American history that no one's ever heard of. And spoiler alert, it's going to shock you, but they're all women, and mostly women of color. So it's really about just amazing women in the suffrage movement, like amazing women of color and Native American women. Like I've heard of Susan B. Anthony and Lucretia Mott and a lot of the suffragists, never about all these amazing Native American women who were just as powerful, spoke all over Europe about American suffrage. Just super love this. I don't know where that will be yet. We're just developing it now, but every day I'm doing more research, finding all these just unbelievably great women that, again, no one's ever heard of. So that's what I'm working on, right? And as I said, sort of once you're out of America and looking, I mean, while I lived in America, while all the shootings were happening, that was very disturbing. But something is different when you're watching it from the outside in a country that has no guns. So everyone you meet is like, what is happening in your country? We don't understand this at all. What in the world is happening? Like, it's just completely foreign to them. So I was spending all this time talking about like all these different shootings, and then Pulse happened, and it just happened that there was this huge screening of For the Bible Tells Me So in Florida, right outside of Orlando, in a little town called Mount Dora, 4 days after Pulse. And so they flew me from Berlin, landed in Orlando like 2 days after the shooting happened. And so I saw all these memorials that were so powerful. This Pulse changed Orlando. I mean, it completely, I'm getting a message that my internet connection is unstable. I apologize for that. So while I was there, and because For the Bible Tells Me So is about religion and homosexuality, I did a lot of press. And I was on an NPR show that airs in Florida called The Three Wise Guys, which is a rabbi, a priest, and an imam. And so we spent an hour talking about these issues. And during one of the commercials, I said to all of them, you know, guys, I'd really love to find a Catholic story for my film. It's something we didn't deal a lot with in For the Bible Tells Me So. One of the stories was a Catholic family, but it was the Gephardts, and she was Catholic and he was like Episcopal. Anyway, I said I'd love to find a Catholic story, maybe even a Latinx story, because homosexuality and transgender stuff is a big issue for the Latinx community. I had no desire to include Pulse in the movie, because that just felt too dangerous and like exploitive and really fraught. But one of them knew a woman who was like the psychologist for a lot of the survivors. And so I reached out to her and just said, I'd love to find a Latinx family who would be willing to tell their story in my film, not including Pulse. So do you know anyone? And she knew Vico, and she knew his parents, and she knew his story, that his father had immediately accepted him, which I loved, because the US media is very invested in this sort of macho Latinx male thing. And so we never see these stories where the father actually says, I don't care, I love you. So I met Vico, really loved him, super sweet, so young, such a young kid. And so we proceeded to meet his parents, and they said yes. So we shot his story. And then like 2 years later, probably in 2018, I was in the US and I had 4 different conversations in 4 parts of the country where people couldn't remember which shooting was Pulse, because after that, the Vegas shooting had happened, and that was the largest one. And then all these other shootings had happened. And I thought, people are forgetting about Pulse. And for me, that was huge, because to me, there was religion all over Pulse. Though that was Latin night at Pulse. So all those Catholic Latin people were probably most likely not welcome in their church the next morning on Sunday morning. And so those kind of spaces are sacred spaces for LGBTQ people. That if you're not LGBTQ, that might sound strange, but that sometimes these bars are the only place you can go and really be who God made you to be. So, and there was religion behind the gun, as we all know too, that the shooter was very steeped in his own religion and talked about it as one of the reasons he was doing what he did. So I went back to Vico's family and said, well, first I went to the psychologist and asked her what she thought. And this was a couple years after Pulse. And she said, you know what, I think it's a really good point. No one has really talked about this in a film, and we want people to remember. We don't want people to forget everyone who was lost. So Vico and his parents were incredibly open to it. And I would say that and the death of Ryan were the 2 hardest things to figure out how to tell in the movie, because the Pulse thing is so fraught. And, Vico had a breakdown. It's not in the movie, but he had a breakdown immediately after. He did not go home. He went into an institution, and he never saw any coverage of Pulse. He never saw any of it. And we found him being rescued. I don't know if you noticed, but in the film, there's footage of him being rescued. I mean, he had not seen any of that. And every time we'd find something, I would call him and I'd call his therapist and just say, Vico's going to see this movie. I don't think we should use this. And there's all these debates. Anyway, happily, it is actually proven to be more of a cathartic thing for him, that it really brought him through it and helped him to finally mourn what happened, because he wasn't crying. He wasn't having any emotion really about it. I don't know if you noticed in the interview, I definitely noticed it, that he's really animated and super young and energetic, but as soon as Pulse was mentioned, this curtain came down in front of his eyes, and he just sort of looks like completely blank. I noticed it before we even shot. Anyway, so that's how I found Vico. Finally, the hardest family to find was I really, really was dedicated to finding a family of color who had a trans child because, again, I wanted this movie to sort of speak to everyone, and it wouldn't be complete without at least one, if not more, families of color talking about these issues. And I met and got close to probably 25 different Black and families of color who had trans kids, and they just kept passing. They just kept saying, it's just too private. We're not ready for the world to know. It just was very hard. And then ultimately, I found the Porches through a friend of mine in New York who had worked with Colleen. And Colleen was one of those people that I was getting to know, and they ultimately said yes, thank goodness, while we were cutting the movie. So we shot that extremely late. And I also really loved that though Elliot's coming out was difficult for him, as always, because he had started cutting and was very depressed, I loved that there was no other like death or huge drama, because the other three stories were so hard in the third act that by the time we get to the third act of the Porsche story, it's more uplifting, and the parents have come around, and he's transitioning. And so, these movies kind of make themselves, honestly. I've learned as a filmmaker that I need to just really pay attention to what's happening in front of me, because it all goes by me. I just have to know when to say, that's the person I want to talk to. It's felt like that with all my films, that there's something else going on, and that, I don't know how to explain it other than that. Life for me is just about paying attention to what the universe puts in front of me. And the rest I can just sort of sit back and be okay with. So I love who ended up being in the film. When I think of the other 25 trans families that said no, they were all wonderful, but it needed to be the Porches. So that's the 20-minute answer to that question.